Now that we've gone through and defined our risk management framework, we've identified our risks, we've gone through our process to respond to those risks, we've identified what could be residual, what's current, what's inherent. Well, how do we keep tabs of our risks and where do we put these things and how do we keep track of them and how do we update them? Well, my friends, it comes in form of a risk register. And if you've been aware of and you've been around information security for a while, you understand and you've maybe seen different types of risk registers. And typically what's involved in keeping these things updated and tracked and ensuring that there's we've got a proper comprehensive approach to our risk management process. So what is the risk register and why is this important? Well, the purpose of the risk register is basically it consolidates is the main thing, right? It consolidates our risks and it basically allows us to have a single location to use these, to operate them by, to view them, to have access to this, right? And I can hear you maybe say, well, why is this important? Well, truth be told, is there are going to be multiple people or departments across the organization that typically rely on this register, right? You may have certain business units, especially through our different processes as well, through our change management environment, which is very important. Typically, this is a single truth, right? If we have a question about risk within the business or maybe within a specific department or a specific business unit or an external entity within the business, well, then we can go into our risk register and we can define and review what that risk process or thing is, right? So typically, this is a living up to date document, meaning it changes, right? It's current, it's up to date. Um, because if we're practicing risk management and its life cycle, and we've discussed what that is before in a previous video, things change in the environment, right? Assets change, processes change, people change, technologies change, operations change, partnerships change, vendors change. There's so many ongoing moving parts to running an operation that things change. So we need to have a single point of single location that we can go in and utilize and review our risk register with updated changes and obviously track those changes and keeping track and keeping tabs of all the risks across the business environment. So what does a typical risk register look like? Well, I've got a redacted version here and they come in many different forms and flavors and views. And you can see down here, there's, almost 10 plus different tabs that I've sort of had to gray out. But this is an example of one, right? You've got typically things like, um, you know, depending again on the appetite and the organization that we're dealing with, the internal design and the other processes, the risk appetite of the businesses, different ways that we can project the risk register. But in typical sense, we've got it down to maybe a couple of tabs down here. So if I can just sort of write it out, so we can have our risk process. There may be certain areas here like mitigation strategies, treatment plan, ownership, other things here. And this specifically is our risk register where we've gone through and we've identified this with a certain maybe, we may have a certain um, identification process within the organization. So maybe it could be the business name. So maybe I'm just going to use ABC Corp, and then we can give it a number. So maybe 001 and so on. So there may be a naming schema within the business that we have to use, the risk strategy itself. So who's behind this, the risk type, the rating of the risk name itself. So you give it a bit of a description and define what that looks like. Maybe if this is in this specific example, this one was done with a specific project. So we had a specific project. Is this a technological team or an operations component? This specific business had a Jira integration. So we had to integrate things with Jira. There's a description component. And then obviously further down here, there are things like obviously the owner, the date of assessment. So if we talk about the date of assessment, it tells us when the thing was dated last, what are the next steps, plans, mitigation processes, and obviously things down here that sort of define, what we're going to deal with and how we're going to deal with this risk. So this risk register in itself comes in again in different forms. There's description fields and requirements that give us an overview of typically how it kind of looks. And we want to again identify that risk. We want to analyze that risk and give it a grading and prioritization based on that severity. And then we want to document it, right? We want to have that documented in this, maybe in this form and this nature. And then this ultimately gives us our single view where anyone within the business or that hierarchical business can go in and look at what's critical, what we're working on, what's not, and then we can have that risk process part of our risk management cycle. I hope you've enjoyed this little overview video on our risk keeping tabs and keeping updates of our risk register. As always, if there's any questions that you have, please let me know if you'd like me to go into more details. And as always, I'll see you in an upcoming video. Thank you for viewing.